Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our studies of 2 Samuel. Today we're examining one of probably the most well-known passages in the book of 2 Samuel, and that is 2 Samuel chapter 11. Here we have the account of David and Bathsheba. Now, this particular account is going to come out in about 3 or 4 different levels. And so, as we talk about the lessons from this particular chapter this morning, I want us to do so from the standpoint of each of those levels of the story or levels of intrigue in the story. And so, we're going to start this morning by looking at the adultery between David and Bathsheba itself. What was it that took place? Well, the time comes, chapter 11, verse 1 says, where kings normally go out to battle. And yet David doesn't. David sends Joab and the army out to battle, but David stays home. And when David stays home, David is the one who's going to get in trouble because he's not where he's supposed to be, out with the army, out with the rest of his men. Instead, he is, as it were, reclining in the lazy boy. And that brings about the opportunity for these things to occur. And one of the lessons that oftentimes gets utilized in this particular section of chapter 11 is the fact that David wasn't where he was supposed to be. And that oftentimes when we're not where we're supposed to be, we wind up getting ourselves in trouble we never would have gotten into had we been where we should have been. David is going to see Bathsheba. He is going to call Bathsheba to him, and he is going to commit adultery. This is going to be also a situation that David is many wives. It's not as though there is nobody at his disposal. He has numerous wives at this point, and yet he's going to go after another man's wife instead. And this is not just any other man. This is Uriah the Hittite. Now, Uriah is one of David's mighty men. He is one of the men who has been with David for quite some time, and he has been one of his best soldiers. David knows Uriah, and David knows him well, seems to be the indication, based upon his position and his prestige within the army of David. And yet you're going to have this situation where he is not just going to betray his relationship with God for this relationship with Bathsheba, but he is also going to betray Uriah. And so there are a lot of things that fall out in this initial phase of the account of 2 Samuel chapter 11. But not only do we see David's adultery, but as you move into the second phase of the chapter, after Bathsheba is going to tell David that she is pregnant because of their adultery, David is going to try to cover up the issue. He's going to try to fix the issue. And it's here that we see the second phase of what transpires in chapter 11 when we see Uriah's faithfulness. You see, Uriah is going to be what David should have been. Uriah is going to be ordered to come back from the army, and he is going to do so, and yet he is going to refuse to take advantages that the rest of his men do not have. He is the epitome of the soldier's soldier. And he was called back. He was called back apparently for no reason as he sees it. And so he wants to go back to his men. He wants to go back to his responsibilities. And because of that, he is not going to take the opportunities that David is hopeful that he will to go and to be with his wife. Instead, he is going to remain at the palace at the call of David until such a time as David releases him, because he is on the job and yet not allowed to do his job. And so we see Uriah's faithfulness in all things, and yet this faithfulness in and of itself is going to be his death sentence, because David is so worried about covering up what he did. Uriah is going to be the servant of innocence. He has done absolutely nothing wrong. He is a man of courage. He is a man of conviction. He is a man of strength. He is the soldier that David needs to have. And yet he's going to be sacrificed because of David's own desires. And so then we see at the end of chapter 11 the cover up. David is going to send a message to Joab. And he's going to tell Joab to put Uriah in the greatest danger, in the greatest area of the fighting that there is, and then to pull back from him. You know, it wasn't uncommon in battles at that time that there would be this great melee, this great mass of men of both sides, and it was very easy for somebody to get lost or to get pulled away or moved away from the rest of their men into an area where they're just surrounded by enemies. And David is going to try to see to it that Uriah has such a predicament and falls in battle. And that is exactly what is going to happen. Joab, when he sends the messenger back, is going to give the messenger what to say if David becomes upset because of the deaths that occurred when they got too close to the walls of the city. And yet David seems extremely calloused in what transpired. And David basically says, don't let this thing bother you. This is a part of war. The sword devours one as another. And he goes on. This is a side of David we have not seen before. This is a side of David that has not been something that David has ever utilized in Scripture. And yet it's going to be something that is going to change and redirect David's family for the rest of his life because of the consequences of what's going to come out of it. And those we're going to see when we come into 2 Samuel chapter 12. But 2 Samuel chapter 11 is heartbreaking in a number of ways, in the way that we see what happens with David, and in the way that we see the lengths to which somebody will go to cover up their sin instead of facing their sin. And yet there's always consequences in those matters. That's what I found in 2 Samuel chapter 11. I hope that it's useful to you. I hope that it's beneficial to you. Next time we will come back and we will begin examining 2 Samuel chapter 12. But until then, have a great day.